Let me just quickly get started here. The first part of the talk, I'm just going to sit and chat with you a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Albuquerque in the 50s and 60s. And I'm feeling very lucky today because my father took quite a few photos in the 50s and 60s, and then he taught me how to do photography as well. So it was sort of our hobby. So you'll see quite a few pictures taken by my dad and niece and years here. Okay, Dan? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, as Rich mentioned, architect and the Harvey historian, that did a great job on doing a very detailed analysis of the architecture and of the history of the hotel. That was presented in July of this year. Those presentations are available both on the Facebook page and on YouTube, so I encourage you to go back. We're not going to cover the history today. That was dramatic. That was dramatic. So next. Next slide.
I can't hear you. Can you speak into the microphone?
Okay, next slide. And next one. Okay, for those of you, I have to do a quick show of hands. How many of you were around in Albuquerque in the 50s and 60s? Oh, there's a good number of you. So if you have interesting memories of the Alvarado, I think Joe and I would be very interested in talking to you about it. Matt did a very good job of describing some of the changes that had been done to the architecture of the Alvarado in the 50s to sort of bring it up to more modern era. I sort of like those changes. It turns out if you're an architectural historian, they didn't look that good because it was sort of these modern kind of changes. But this was the Alvarado that I was hanging out at as a small child. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. You heard it. The downtown Albuquerque in the 50s and 60s, I think for those of us who were in town, had a lot of fond memories. For some reason, my mother was just enamored of Paris shoes. And so we were down there a lot for shopping. My dad had his offices in the First National Bank there on Central Avenue. So we frequently came downtown to meet him for lunch. And as I described in July, for some reason, after we were done with lunch, we had a big thing of apple pie. My mom and dad would look at us kids and go, "Why don't you scram and go out and play in the garden?" And so we spent quite a bit of time out in the gardens of the Alvarado. I always thought the Alvarado was such a special place because it had that just in the middle of downtown. There wasn't any parking and everything was crowded. You had those luxurious gardens and the ponds with really good. And then if my sisters and I were feeling really adventurous, we'd sneak into the Indian room, which I thought was very mysterious. So, downtown Albuquerque, and of course, Route 66 will look for Rogers' leadership on the upcoming Route 66 celebration. Next slide. A couple of pictures that I think you'll be interested in. This, Albuquerque grew eastward after in the post-war years, and my parents, for some reason, took pride in the fact that they always lived at the edge of town. So this was our first house. This was our first house. It was constructed in 1953. We actually moved in the spring of 1954. If you look carefully, that's me. That's my mother planted trees in the backyard. That's in the 1400 block of Adams Northeast. The street that goes down the hill is Jodan, southwest, south, and then the street that goes up the hill is Washington Street. Washington over to the intersection of Constitution. That intersection never quite seemed right to me. I don't know why. So that was 1953. Next slide, please. And then in the early 1960s, as the family was growing, next slide, Dan. They ended up buying a house, or they buying a house up in the Boston Gladden area, which was again right at the edge of town. My parents were so proud of that. We were the first house on the block, and that's right at Comanche and Louisiana. And in the 1960s, if you've got a big growing family, you might as well get a picture of them on the back of the brand new station wagon, right? A little bit of car culture here. So next slide, please. Trains, planes, and automobiles. My dad was a big airplane nut, so we hung out at the airport quite a bit back in the 50s, and he took quite a few pictures. I think the Albuquerque Museum may be interested in quite a few of those photos once I get through this presentation. So we were at the airport quite a bit, but to get back to Iowa to visit my grandparents, we took the train. Either El Capitan or the chief, or we did the super chief once, which I didn't like, it was just too formal. But which meant that we were down at the Alvarado line, either picking up my grandparents or having lunch with them before they took off to go back to Iowa. And we did trips both in summertime and at Christmas. One or two of the kids would take off and go off. So we spent quite a bit of time at the train station. Again, romping and playing around with the Alvarado Hotel. And then the picture in the lower side, I found that lower right for you, but I found that online. I'm not quite sure where that is. Monty Avery is here doing research on the construction of the Coronado Freeway, I understand. So we'll have him explain exactly where that is. That's the freeway construction that came through both in the early 1960s. So that's what kind of gave you a feel for what Albuquerque was like from a transportation standpoint. Next picture. Next down. Thomas leaves downtown as well. The car culture took over in the post-war years, not only in Albuquerque, but just about everywhere. I don't have any fond memories of the construction on Nob Hill. That was a little bit before my time. But Nob Hill, in fact, I was doing some research on that. It was advertised as the first modern shopping center in the whole state of New Mexico when it was built in 1946 and 1947. Winrock opened shortly after that in 1961, and then Coronado Center in 1965. Again, all completely car-centric as far as getting there is concerned, which meant getting downtown, get to the shopping center, get to do any shopping or even have dinner and lunch. Got to be more and more of a headache for people. And we experienced the same thing growing up. Next slide, please. These are probably two of the most important slides in terms of the impact on the Alvarado Hotel that I want to show here. The first one was the Santa Fe Railroad. And I frequently talk to people that says, why wasn't the railroad interested in saving the Alvarado? Why didn't Fred Harvey step in? Neither corporation had any interest whatsoever in the historic preservation at this point. The Santa Fe Railroad had become a part of Santa Fe Industries in 1968. And they were now, instead of a standalone organization, they were one of about 9 corporations reporting into a board of directors. And they were under tremendous pressure. Their labor costs were increasing. They were under tremendous costs to reduce, they were under tremendous pressure to reduce costs. And that starting in 1968, it really did a major job on eliminating a good number of their passenger trains. I'll give the Santa Fe credit for the fact that they held on to a quality passenger train service, even though they eliminated most of the secondary trains. The picture, I get a kick out of the picture at the top. It was taken by my friend Ernie Robart. That's the last run of Santa Fe Chief. We ran about a 12-hour different schedule from El Capitan to Super Chief. And of course, that's underneath the federally financed Interstate 40 that was, or Interstate, yeah, that's Interstate 40 that was being built. And on the railroad tracks, this last run of the Chief. The last run of the El Paso, and then the lower picture, which is the kind of day train between here and El Paso, Texas. So major train offs in 1968. The Alvarado, of course, had been built as a passenger train hotel. That's how you're supposed to get there. And there was no parking downtown for the Alvarado. I'm not sure, Joe and I have discussed that as to if you came to check into the Alvarado, they just tell you to park there. Does somebody have some knowledge of that? We'll take questions at the end. And that was what was happening with the Santa Fe Railroad. I was joking with Joe. I said, you know, if somebody went to to John S. Reed, who was president of Santa Fe at the time, said, you know, what can be kind of nice if we save the Alvarados for historical purposes and everything. All you would have had to have done is call one of the board of directors at the Santa Fe Industries, said, I'd like to slow down and try to save that hotel. They would have said, what the heck are you talking about? Get rid of that. So the next slide, please. The other big changes were happening with Fred Harvey. Fred Harvey really had made a decision in the mid-1960s to invest heavily in the new Sunport. They'd had a restaurant at the airport, and were really investing a tremendous amount of money in the Sunport when it was built. And their emphasis really nationwide was pulling away from the old railroad hotels, and had moved. I think they tried doing freeway type concessions. That didn't seem to work out, but they were really focused in many cities on the airports. And I remember going to the restaurant, to the gift shop at the Sunport, all of them labeled Fred Harvey. And then realizing what an impact that really would have on the Alvarado as far as the corporate investment was concerned. The other thing is that late in the 1960s, then Fred Harvey was in discussion with the city on building and leasing out the new hotel. It was right at the airport. They still got to share it. So the corporation also then, Fred Harvey, is very similar to Santa Fe, then became a part of a larger conglomerate. They were part of AmFac. I guess if you're named AmFac, you're going to hold on to the Fred Harvey name because AmFac doesn't resonate too well. So they held on to the Fred Harvey name probably until the mid 1980s, late 1980s. The brand, but again, as far as the corporation is concerned, the old Fred Harvey was gone at this point. The next slide, please, Dan. I was still in love with the Alvarado, so on the last night of when they announced that the hotel was closing, I kept a close eye on it. And I went down on the last night for the Indian room. And I'm proud to say that I made the last purchase at the Indian room. There was a gentleman who bought a couple of things, and they told him that he made the last purchase, but he didn't get a receipt. And again, I was in high school at the time, and I didn't have much money. So I bought it's a postcard and a piece of candy, I think 26 cents, but I got Carmen Hurtado to sign the receipt. So I'm the official. If you'd like to shake my hand afterwards. But that was the last night of the interview. And I will give Fred Harvey credit for holding on to that, as I think is a pretty good resource for Native American goods and souvenirs up until the very end. And then I think it was the next night we came downtown as well. Next slide, then. For a very empty tour through the hotel. It was ghostly. It was the last night. The lease was up within 24 hours, and we got to walk through. And the manager who was in charge of it, he was so excited that he had some people there who were going through. He gave me a room key as a souvenir of that last night. So I still have my Alvarado Hotel room key. Next slide, please. Last guest checked out. I think that was the first. I think it was might have been the second. Made the newspaper. And in the meantime, there was an effort going on to save the hotel. I was a high school kid, so I didn't have a lot of time to pay attention to it. But we'll go to the next slide. But I did hear that there were demonstrations going on, and there were meetings going to be held at City Council. So we kept an eye on that. I had 2 or 3 friends who were also interested. So we came down. I remember the march on the Alvarado. We went from the gazebo at Old Town. We marched all the way up Central Avenue to the hotel. Our cry as we were marching was "Remember Huning Castle." Save the Alvarado, remember Huning Castle. And then there was a rally at the hotel itself. And as I recall, Joe may want to clarify this. I think we had some issues with the police because we were crowding up on First Street. But I was always impressed. I said, I don't know who these people are who are trying to save the Alvarado, but I was very impressed with their efforts. And when I retired and moved back to Albuquerque, I started looking around. And darned if I didn't find the guy. Now go back one. Yeah, go back. Darned if I didn't find the guy. The upper left it's the upper left for you on the clipping. The guy with the mustache and the black glasses. Turns out his name is Joe McKinney. So I had this clipping in my file, and so I started looking around. guess who's still around? Joel McKinney. And I talked about 10 years ago, and I said, Joel, I was involved with the FBI, I don't know anything about it. We really should do a presentation for somebody on the efforts to save the Alvarado Hotel. He said, yeah, let's get it. So it's only been about 10 years. But I was so excited when I started scanning these clippings. I said, my gosh, there's Joel. So with that, I would like to introduce one of the key people involved with these efforts to save the Alvarado Hotel, Mr. Joe McKinney. Joe?
Can we go back to the previous slide just a second? I have a disclaimer here. In the gazebo,
You have to talk into the microphone.
oh, I'm talking well, not right here. Right there is me. Okay. And then that is long. And there is my lovely wife in the front row of 62 years, Mary McKinney. Signing the petition. Okay, next slide. Then. Yeah, that's me. We lost the Alvarado 54 years, 8 months, 1 day, 14 hours, and 23 minutes ago. But who's counting? I still miss it. I was first introduced to the Alvarado 59 years ago. When I was a senior planner straight out of college from Texas Tech, and senior planner in the city planning department. And a wonderful gentleman who was the city attorney, Frank Moran, would take me to various places to eat downtown. Magazines, many of you remember that, I think. The Little House Cafe, which is, we're trying to get landmark right now, which has been moved to Monte Vista Central. It's one of those little diners that was hauled around during World War II. And in the Franciscan Hotel, which is no longer here, but to the coffee shop there. And last but not least, the Alvarado Hotel coffee shop. And I went almost every Wednesday for 2 years that I worked for the city. They had the Fred Harvey operation had a wonderful, wonderful chocolate cream pie on Wednesdays. And at the end of all of this today, we're in the Albuquerque Museum, and my wife and I are both docents, 19 and 18 years as docents here. In Gallery 5, the only in Albuquerque, and in the, which one is it, Bruce? Anyway, I can reach you there. They do it by sections. We have the pie cabinet that I used to get the pies out of. And you can see a reproduction. It's a aluminum ring, but you can see the reproduction of the pie. Fred Harvey cut the pies in quarters. And that quarter pie in 1965 was 25 cents. And it was almost a full building. So, next slide, man. What I'd like to do is a little background. And I have, for those of you who know me, I'm supposed to stay on track here and keep within a reasonable time period. And I have notes, which I might refer to or not now because I see a lot of friends in the audience. A lot of new people, but anyway, let's stick to it. Background for the historic preservation. There are several bullets here. 1966, the core comprehensive plan. Dan, next slide, please. In 1966, well, and Chuck had alluded to this, well, more than alluded to it. There was the out-migration of the downtown, retail, commercial, other businesses in operation. The Windrock Shopping Center, Carmelo, had a major impact on the downtown area. So in 1966, while I was in the city planning department, and I'm going to do this again, can everyone see the little marker there in that black area? Right here is the Alvarado Hotel complex. This is Central Avenue. So we devised a new master plan called the Torah Comprehensive Plan with the Alvarado on one end of it in a park-like situation. First Street has been kind of reoriented from here over to there, but park-like, and on the other, going down what was Central Avenue, Robinson Park over here with the expansion south of what was Central. So you had a lovely green space here, another one here as the 2 acres for this very, very, well, probably would never have been accomplished and has not been, but master plan. Next slide, please. Barkley, who was our illustrator for the plan, will see, and again, if you can see my little arrow there by the 2 girls, a little pointer, the Alvarado Hotel in its glory and the park lot in front. Now, wouldn't that be nice to have that downtown today? I don't want to see a show of hands, because I think Barkley was interesting, and I digress here a little bit. On the trees, these are large, large renderings, and some are still in City Hall, and they date from the 1966 period. But he would put himself in those and other people. That is me sitting on the bench right there, reading what looks like maybe a racing form. It's not quite a newspaper. And he said, that's why I put the nun next to you. Next slide, please. So that was the comprehensive master plan that we were looking at. Now, this is prior to anyone knowing about the demise of the Alvarado. The next thing that we have on the bullet, 1967, there was a group of us that were interested very much in how Albuquerque was growing. And by 1967, I was only in city planning for 2 years. So by 1967, I was leaving and going to work for an architectural firm as the head of their planning section, but still interested in Albuquerque, and as I am even today. That a group of us, of architects, educators, planner, put together a group called Albuquerque Urban Progress, which translates to Albuquerque Up, which we thought was really kind of cute at the time. This is before any social media or anything that happened. And so we're not only looking at the downtown, we were looking at historic preservation, we were looking at the expansion of the city at that time. Albuquerque was kind of becoming a runaway Los Angeles. And so we had this organization, and in 1968, and I'll get back to Albuquerque Up, because it transitioned into other things. But in 1968, the Tijeras Urban Renewal Project started. Actually, 68, I think really technically 67 through 1970. The federal government is slow in moving, city government is slow in moving. But the Tijeras Urban Renewal Project, and that project was $25 million and covered the area of the Alvarado Hotel, north into Tijeras. And I really tried to find out how far west into the city it went, but not all that way. Basically, it was a renewal project for along the railroad track, which included the Alvarado Hotel. Interesting fact that the Santa Fe Railroad asked to have the Alvarado and the station, that property south of Central and First Street and the railroad tracks, removed from the urban renewal district, which they did. But in doing so, it left on the north side of Central, and those of you who might have been familiar with it, at First Street and, well, the underpass, On one side, you had the YMCA building. On the other side, to the east, you had the Charles Ilfeld building, the warehouse. First major poured concrete structure west of the Mississippi. Couple of really kind of historic buildings. The Santa Fe did not ask to have that removed, even though it was the Santa Fe property. Those two were on long-term leases. And urban renewal is notorious for taking over the land, if you will, and breaking leases. Interesting thing then is that at the end, and I tried to find this, but tax records and whatnot, at the end of the urban renewal process, after those two structures had been removed, the land was sold back to the Santa Fe Railroad. So here we have a situation where some real conflicts are going on. One thing that in recently in researching this, because most of my notes are here in the Albuquerque Museum, and I'll talk about briefly about the Alvarado exhibit that the museum did, I think, in 1998. But I ran into this, and I want to read it. And this is dated. We'll get into those entities who are interested in saving the Alvarado. I don't know how, this is seemingly very early and shocking to me. On October 1st, 1969, and everything we're dealing with is kind of late 69, early 70s. So December 69, January, February 1970. State Planning Office addressed a letter to the president of the Santa Fe Railroad Company in which it expressed concern for the future of the Alvarado Hotel. The letter pointed out the importance of buildings, building to the historical heritage of Albuquerque. In reply, G.W. Cox, vice president of the railroad, stated, quote, that our engineers are firmly of the opinion that the building is too old to warrant remodeling or rehabilitation. And while we plan to raise it, no time has been set for the demolition. Neither have we decided what, if anything, to do with the property after it has been cleared. We are open to suggestions, of course, and you may rest assured that future use of the property will be compatible with plans for the redevelopment of downtown Albuquerque. Actually, what we know is the property sat vacant as a dirt and gravel parking lot for 17 years. The next thing I want to talk about, though, in all of this, and how important it was that we felt that the Alvarado was important to the redevelopment of the downtown area, is the 1969 Albuquerque Goals Program. This group that I talked about, Albuquerque Urban Progress, we got wind that Dallas, Texas had done a goals program in 1968. And we said, Albuquerque needs a goals program. And so we did everything we could, and we finally coerced the city into doing its goals program, i.e. 1969. There were several committees. The Urban Development Committee was headed by George Pearl. Anyone remembers George as a architect and a preservation architect? I was on that committee, and anyway, on the goals program, actually there was a newspaper that was sent out with the goals to all households, and it was a newspaper format, and it's what the committees had come up with. Number 11. And I might read that one. Number 11 on the goals program was the establishment of a railroad historic district, including the Alvarado Hotel, railroad station, and related commercial and residential buildings, which is linked to the new city center and Old Town with adequate humanly scaled connections. Actually, I have some notes here, but I was asked to study those connections for that. Anyone hear of the railroad trail or the new trails program for the city? It's 19 what? 23, or 2023, 24. We move slowly. We move very slowly. My connection was along Central Avenue, was along the proposal was along the same from Old Town to downtown via a rail system that could be run similar to the early horse-drawn rail carriage that went from Old Town to New Town in the 1880s. And so Mr. Whittison here in the program reminded me that some of those tracks are still under Central Avenue that they have been paved over. But anyway, that was the Albuquerque Goals program. Those were things that all of those indicated that the Alvarado was important to Albuquerque and to the redevelopment. Next slide, please, Dan. So taking action to save the Alvarado, let me do the photo first. This is George Pearl. He was the chairman of the urban portion, the urban development portion of the Goals program. Next to him is Ruth Armstrong. Now, Ruth was later placed on the city's committee for studying the Alvarado Hotel and its benefits. The next person is a Joe McKinney with hair. I want you to notice that. And the next person is Maria Blahu, who I worked with in city planning. And so what this is really, and I'm holding the plans of a section of the Alvarado. If you recall that Cox had indicated that the building was not worth rehabilitating. We found with the Georgia and the American Institute of Architects, myself, planner and architectural background, that, and with a civil engineer, we determined that it was structurally sound. The south wing was not as structurally sound as the rest. That was the portion that had been used for storage of the kitchen and the quarters for the employees on the second floor. Wood frame construction, stucco, chicken wire, then stucco, and there was a termite top. That was one of the earlier sections, and in the restoration, we have proposed that portion be removed. But over to taking action, save the Alvarado. The Citizens Committee to Save the Alvarado was actually kind of out of the Albuquerque up. What had happened was that after Chuck talked about the candlelight processional that we did from the gazebo in Old Town to along Central Avenue to the Alvarado, we went over and I had requested a meeting with the city commission to voice our concern of activating a program by the city to look at what it could do about saving the Alvarado. I mean, it was in the master plan and all of these things. That committee grew out of a meeting where the city commission did not show up. It's interesting that we walked over, we were meeting in the chambers for the city council, or city commission, at that time in Old City Hall. The news, all three news stations showed up with their cameramen and whatnot. The commission did not. And at that, I was elected to chair a citizens committee to save the Alvarado. So that was the transition from kind of the Albuquerque urban progress. And we did get the city of Albuquerque to do a preservation committee, which they actually had input and with the commission, a final hearing in the civic auditorium. And I'm working at that time and I need to keep moving. But there were some things that came out of that. The Albuquerque Historic Society played a role. The Albuquerque Institute of Architects New Mexico chapter played a role, certainly in doing the evaluation of the structure. And the state planning office, I read you what they did, which was very, very early. To that end, what we tried to do was keep the Alvarado in the newspaper as much as we could to get citizens' participation, to get their input, to get their voice heard by the city. Because obviously we were not getting our voice heard directly with the Santa Fe Railroad. In fact, we were asked not to by the city. And so we did remain silent for a very, very long time. I'm going to use my little pointer again because I just noticed Chuck found this in the newspaper, this Save the Alvarado Oranges and so on and so forth, about the meetings at the Cartorium. I have my speech that I just transcribed from cursive, and do you know that cursive is almost like a foreign language? It took my wife is a reading specialist at UPS, 30 years in teaching. And she is a beautiful cursive writer. As an architect, I couldn't. And I should have printed my talk, and I didn't. So I'm sure that if we have time, I might read it because I found it interesting in retyping it. But at the very bottom of this, it says paid for by Joe McKinney. That ad right there, paid for by Joe McKinney. At 85, I forget these things. Okay, next slide, please. So here, and I see that the tabs, my tabs didn't work. Is a Alvarado timeline. These are things that we got in 3 different newspapers. The Tribune, the Journal, and the Albuquerque News were the 3 newspapers at the time. So just kind of going through, I've got some other notes here. I didn't want to look at those. If we look at, well, we see on the first 30th, 1970, the headline was Safe Hotel Group Still Maps Plan. It's not a perfect journal. And that was an 8 o'clock meeting in the Civic Auditorium. The next one, the first 31st, 1970, is Alvarado demolition begins. That was not really the hitting of the wrecking ball into the building. That was Coronado Wrecking, who had the contract. They removed the roof tile. They removed windows and doors and things that could be salvaged. But they did open it up to the public, and it was interesting. You could go to the Alvarado, and they had tables, and there are people in the front lobby area. You can go in with your hammer, saw, whatever, and remove anything you wanted to. You had to bring it by the table, and they would tell you how much you had to pay. There was no price tags on the tile or anything. Now, those of you who want to go with me afterwards and look at the pie cabinet, the tile on that, some of that tile now is selling for $125 a tile through the internet. Anyway, there was that. As we go on down, on the 2nd of February the 1st, 1970, that it says, Anderson reveals Alvarado declared national treasure. Well, that was Senator Clinton P. Anderson. What had happened, and it's kind of, sometimes it's who you know. We the citizens got the Alvarado Hotel on the National Register in 16 days. The keeper of the National Registry, Paul Goldberg, in Washington, D.C., was an old college professor of mine in architecture at Texas Tech. It did not help because even if you're on the National Register, you can be, but what they do is they just simply remove your name. Next slide. And you'll see that we continued. The last one I'll mention is the February the 15th, 1970. It says, it it's misleading because it says the People's Column, Harvey House still stands. Well, they were referring to the one in Las Vegas. So I wanted to clarify that. Next slide, please. So here we have, we kept it before for over 2 months. We kept articles in the papers. We did everything we possibly could. The handwriting was on the wall, that we knew. But this gives you kind of some of the stories. This Friday night, there's a couple of things that on one that I did pass up. Was an article in the paper, an ad by the Harvey Corporation that was the last meal at the Alvarado in the dining room. And it was the New Year's buffet. So we're talking January 1st, 1970, the New Year's buffet. $3.50. In today's, and it's kind of a bargain because I looked it up, in today it'd be $28, which is not bad for a buffet. We just did some traveling to Yellowstone and Tetons. It's amazing how expensive it is in Jackson. Next slide, please. And here we go, Chuck Larrabee. It's now a dog and pony show.
Who's the dog?
So we're playing that. Part three really is the wrap up, and I think what I described in the first section was the just the forces were against saving the Alvarado Hotel. They were just moving so fast. And once the corporation had decided that let the contract, and you can jump in there anytime, to start the demolition, I was astonished as an observer on how quickly things are moving. So the next slide, please. I posted around the room some of the posters from the auction. I was feeling horrible at this point because I sensed that things were futile. So I didn't go to the auction. On top of that, as a high school kid, I didn't have any money or time off during the day to go down there. But it was really the open to the public. It was an auction and everything from restaurant. I can't imagine probably everything from China to restaurant equipment to silverware to bed clothing. Who knows everything that was in that auction. But it was a couple of days worth of sales, and then if we go to the next slide. Next slide, Dan. Some pictures that I took. There was a very eerie period once the hotel really had been gutted, that nothing seemed to be happening. And I've talked to Joe about this. I said there had to be a point where the people who were trying to save the Alvarado said it's over with. But at this point, perhaps it could have been saved. So I was with my good friend Ernie Robart, I think maybe a couple other people. We didn't ask permission. We had our cameras with us, and we just walked through the hotel from one end to the other. And I think these are some photos that I think the museum may be interested in getting their hands on after this is over. If you look at the photo in the upper left, there is the latrine after it's been gutted. The lower photo is the Indian room. And then off the main lobby was there was some hotel, there were some rooms, hotel, but I think that was in the section for the Harvey. Yes. At one point, just being gutted and the plumbing ripped out.
That was the first section to go with the solid weed. It was February the 13th, Friday the 13th, 1970, that the Coronado wrecking ball hit the main structure, including the bar and the lobby area, the front desk.
So again, if I had time and could get a ride downtown, I would go with some friends, and again, we would take pictures. So next slide, man. And I was astonished, without any question from the wrecking crew, we just allowed them to wander either through the building or around the grounds. taking pictures. And at the time, I think I was fascinated by the wrecking and just the destruction that was going on. In retrospect, I think these extremely very, very sad photographs.
If I could interject right here. This is something that's been lost. We have no idea where it is. I know when the museum was doing the show in the Alvarado, I tried to find it. Is the Indian building, the eagle, man eagle above that. We don't know what happened to it. It did disappear after your photo, but if anyone knows where it is, we sure would like to find it for the Albuquerque. Okay.
It just,
I checked with Dale. Dale Whale and I became, I wouldn't say close, but we were on a first name basis. He was the owner of Coronado Ranking.
I had to include the quote. When we were putting this slideshow together, I said to Joe, I said, well, yeah, at what point did you guys just give up and did you have what did you do? Did you go out and have a drink or did you just go into mourning? Given all the energy that had gone into trying to save it. And he said, no, we fought it right up until the end. I don't know when that
It hasn't stopped.
Next photo, please. Next slide. Yeah, there was the point, clearly nothing that could have been done at this point to save it. And if you look at that corner, just to talk about a total mess. And Joe, maybe you can jump in here. What I heard from just on the street, the Coronado Wrecking actually lost money on the demolition because they had done the estimate based on the fact that they had scoped out the south end of the building. But they didn't realize when they got to the north end that it was a solid concrete structure. So
Yeah. The 1924 addition to the Alvarado North Central Avenue, the two-story, almost became the home of the Albuquerque Museum. At one point, we looked at it from even that standpoint. I was chair of the site selection committee for this museum. And Suzanne DeBorge, who was the director at the time, Suzanne and I actually toured that because we were trying to move the museum from the old airport to this facility that we're in today. That was one thing. I failed to mention along the way, though, that the city's, what came out of the city's committee for the Alvarado was to the city to request the Santa Fe to donate the Alvarado to the city. And guess what? The Santa Fe said, no, but we'll sell it to you for $1 million. And we'll get into what $1 million back then would have been is $12,145,000 today. Yes, it's within reason. Cannot prove this, but at the time period, all of this was going on in Albuquerque and across the state. There was an individual named Robert O. Anderson who was doing old buildings into restaurants, the Maria Teresa, the legal tender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in Santa Fe, Albuquerque, down by Roswell, all over. It was rumored that he said, I'll give you $1 million. Santa Fe immediately said 1.5 million. So they jumped. It's obvious that he backed out. I don't know if it was him or not, but that was the rumor.
clearly the corporate decision had been made, tear it down. So if we go to the next slide. Again, I was just astonished that we were able to get this close to the destruction. Next slide, please, Dan. That is the end of the north end of the building, so clearly it was over. On the upper right hand picture, that is the part of the building that's along along Central Avenue. So next slide. Monthly parking available.
For 17 years.
Empty lot for 17 years, and there's probably another story on the construction of the Alvarado Transportation Center.
That's another scoping for the Historical Society.
You have to lead on the next couple slides.
Okay, yes, next slide. So So what came out of this? Next slide, Dan. So in our eulogy, 1973 to 1976, we created the Albuquerque Landmark Survey. Out of that was a publication, and this was prior to the centennial of 1776. And so we were trying to get something, the interest going in historic preservation. So we actually, our office was under the Cultural Affairs Office, the Mayor's office, and was in the southwest corner of the Chemo Theater, which was fun. And the city by that time was starting to recognize some things and had purchased the Chemo. The next one is the Albuquerque Landmarks and Urban Conservation Commission, 1978. In 1958, 59, 57, that era was the first historic district in Albuquerque, Old Town. And we have the Old Town Architectural Review Board. In 1965, I was the planning department staff to that board. So that was part of my historic background, if you will, in Albuquerque, working with that. We advocated and have been advocating additional historic overlay zones for neighborhoods, commercial, whatever, to keep this preservation, this history of Albuquerque going. And so in 1978, the city dismissed the Old Town Architecture Review Board, which I was on at the time. I was slighted I did not get a thank you letter from the mayor. But anyway, and the Albuquerque Landmarks and Urban Conservation, well, now it's just called simply Landmarks. And I've just completed my 6th year on the Landmarks Commission for the 2nd time. The next, the Albuquerque Conservation Association, 1980, we know as TACA. There's some TACA board members that are here present. Preservation. Then we have the Alvarado, Colores did a 1995 of the Alvarado Hotel, which you can still get. I know that they recorded George Pearl for about 3 hours. They recorded me for about 3 hours. And we each have our 7.5 minutes of fame. The 1995, the New Mexico Heritage Preservation Alliance. That was a spinoff, really, of the loss of the Alvarado. And what we found here in other cities and counties were in having some of the same problems is that we started a statewide organization. And actually the formation of that was in what is now the Press Club, if you're familiar with the log cabin structure, which was Whittlesey, who Whittlesey was the architect to the Alvarado Hotel. What goes around the country. And then the Albuquerque Museum of Art and History exhibit, Jewel of the Railroad Era, Albuquerque, or the Alvarado Hotel, was a major exhibit here at the museum. And that's where we have some of the ribbons still. Okay, next slide. Here we are. This I just found was kind of interesting. If the Alvarado cost of $200,000 in 1902, in 1970, that would have been $895,624. The Alvarado cost, the same thing today, would be $7,306,395. Now, I think you can double that because of the cost of materials, labor, so on and so forth. But that would be just a dollar translation. The cost to have purchased it at $1,500,000 in 1970 today would be $12,145,941. There was no one to step forward, and kind of, I think that kind of brings it together. It was quite complex. It would have been fantastic to still have that as the eastern anchor for the downtown. And I would still like to go there and get my chocolate cream. Next one. Can anyone answer that? I think given the research that Chuck did and where the Santa Fe stood and also the Fred Harvey Corporation, the answer was no, we could not have saved it today. What do you think?
Talking to Joe about this, I started to ask questions about the San Franciscan Hotel. But that was at the other end of downtown, and we didn't really hang out there, so I didn't have that much affection for it. But that was pretty much torn down without any sort of effort to try to save it. So I think the Alvarado was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, facing tremendous corporate pressure to get rid of it, regardless of what the citizens wanted. Save it today, all right? That's hard to say. So thank you. We're gonna. Joe Harvey and Carlo Ortega here at the archive did a tremendous job. Matt Louie did a fantastic job of giving me the background on the Fred Harvey Corporation. And I'll go back and online and take a look at his history from a very detailed history. And you know, I know when the lobby was remodeled in 1937. Matt's covers that. That's one thing my dad for a lot of those photos from the 50s and 60s. I've got trays full of photos taken by my dad, which I think may be of interest to the museum eventually. But this is the first time I've had a chance to show them to a public audience. So thank you to them for that. And we are willing now to take some questions. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Anyway, questions? The plan had some questions.
In speculation, while they wouldn't accept $1 million, they were willing to get land cleared of an old building, so they were not paying taxes on improved property. And I think it was financial, that was the bottom line. And with the urban renewal, removing buildings such as across the street, the Savoy Hotel, the Knights of Pythias Hall, all the time that was being removed, those same type buildings in Denver became Larimer Square. Larimer Square is really vital for Denver downtown, even to this day, and it is a guilty place. We lost all of that. So it financial. No, they do not want to pay the taxes on an improved property. A vacant land, even if they sold it, yeah. I have no idea. I mean, Chuck did more research on that and found out things that we didn't know about at the time of the corporate situation with the Santa Fe. Remember, AMFAC was coming in. There was all kinds of things going on. That's a whole. Someone could write a thesis on that.
My theory on that is that once the board of directors told John Nesreed and the leadership, tear it down, it was probably woven into their goals for the year. It was one of the things that's reduced costs as much as possible. And if it was looking like there was no room at that point for any affection or any sort of historical. Gee, this has been a great monument to the Santa Fe. We don't really know that was gone. Yeah, if you look at the operations, we got $1 million. It was kind of cheap.
Oh, there's one chart. Was this part of a trend throughout the railroad system to get rid of these old buildings and restaurants?
Fred Harvey had closed down most of their, I think almost all of their railroad hotels at this point. I think that when the Alvarado got caught was that the lease was up and Fred Harvey was looking at the airport. But it's interesting, I've been keeping, I go to the Fred Harvey History Weekends every year, and that we get a report from Alan F.L. and Senior Freedom on the current statuses on some of the historic preservation. The old Harvey house in Clovis, whose name I'm blanking on right at the moment, is still standing. And there has been a very sort of, I don't know, criticize it, but there has not been a strong effort to save it, but the railroad, BNSF still owns it. But has not gone in and torn it down. And I just have a funny feeling that somebody in the rank and file at the BNSF may be keeping an eye on it, but sooner or later, unless the city where it comes in or something comes in with a lot of money, they're gonna just tear it down. But the fact that it still exists is to me is amazing. Also, if you look at the Castaneda, La Posada, LNFL did a great job with those two hotels.
You know, a group went in and put a restaurant in the Clovis Harvey property. Fancy, it got an article in the New Mexico magazine last year. So something, it's a newer development that it's like laying in the legal tender. They put something in that is very attractive in that property.
I'm not sure that restaurant is still open. I'd have to double check, but the issues really with some of this whole property too is just ADA compliance, safety, fire safety, that whole.
So ADA. Yeah.
Janet?
Well, I just wanted to, make a comment about the whole concept of public meetings and the public rallying together to save something or try to make something happen has really evolved over the last 50+ years. So I was a senior at the University of New Mexico in the spring of 1970. What was on the mind of many people was the Vietnam War, protests all over the United States and in Albuquerque. And I mean, so yes, this was important, but when you look at the fact that, and Joe's comment about keeping it in the newspaper, things were either in the Albuquerque Journal and Tribune or on the 3 TV stations, period. There wasn't this ability that people have now, social media, being able to get people like in 15 minutes to come have a protest rally on blah, blah, blah street. So I just think the whole, wrong place at the wrong time and saving things was a very different world than it was.
I really appreciate Janet's comments about that you were doing it in 1970, because I felt so deprived of a win to save the Alvarado that in 1969 I became the first university planner. In 1970 I saved Hodgson Hall because of the Alvarado.
Yeah, more questions? Maybe.
What do you think will ever happen to the Glen?
Well, then Harvey House will never happen to the
Oh, it's owned by the city.
It will be there forever. Thank goodness.
They bought it.
The city owns it and it's very, very active. I know they're going to be an open house for the Harvey weekend. We have to October, and as I understand it, they have volunteers who are handling the food service.
Yes.
The lunch service. And
Absolutely.
I was told, get there early. Yes, sir.
I think you're right. I think we got that. I just thought of another statistic. There was also the Santa Fe had indicated, okay, maybe we will rent the building for $5,000 a month. Now that was in 1970. Doing the math on that today would be $24,000 a month or something. So you know that it was, the handwriting was really in the wall.
Someone with his hand up, very,
The comment about the land Harvey House being a river may not be true.
Oh.
South of the land, and occasionally the newspaper has been some comments the city of Berlin is seeking for money. They may be for sale.
We'll have to keep an eye on that, although I haven't heard that, so that's a good.
So is the Judy Chicago.
And gentlemen, on the end of the
I got two questions. So you mentioned that shield that was over the building. You know what it was made of? And the second question is, was the iconic sign that was in several photos that's yellow, was that ever saved?
Well, to my knowledge, the shield was wood. I believe that was attached to the stucco. I need to go back and look at photos, but we know that it disappeared. There was so much. I mean, Chuck's key is 124, and my room key is 102. So we still have some things from the Alvarado. I refuse to buy anything in the walkthrough, tear down, take home that Coronado Wrecking did. Dale Will gave me 2 mirrors from the Alvarado, one from the old south wing and one from the north, or from the core wing, which I still have in my room 102 key. But I just I could not bring myself to remove anything to take home. I really felt very, very sad about this because I mentioned every Wednesday I went. The Harvey girls would save my table by the window. I mean, not let anyone sit there. And I had to tell them when I was going on vacation so they could let the table.
gentleman.
I'm from Hawaii, and is Amtrak and purchased Red Harvey, at 68, is that the big 5, sugar or growing plantation companies?
I have to do some more research on it, and they were really Josie enough. I think they are, I don't know. I think they were connected.
Okay,
I think they're connected there, but I had enough to do with the Alvarado on it. I think they did too much work on that thing, except Amtrak held on to the Fred Harvey name up until the late 1980s, because I guess, as I mentioned earlier, but I mean, Amtrak is not, you're not going to look at a menu and go, gosh, what a great name for the menu for service. It's just a conglomerate of those two.
And then Trudy's waving her hand.
There's a gentleman back here that's pointing. Go ahead. Oh,
Gentlemen,
I'm not old enough to remember the Alvarado, but I'm a huge fan of the history and I've read much about it. But I just want to say something positive since somebody mentioned about other railroad hotels. I had the pleasure of spending Tuesday night at Costanera in Las Vegas. So if y'all ever get a chance to experience a Red Harvey Railroad hotel and eat the dining room, they'll do. So it was great.
comment that you can't hear was, go spend some time at the Costanera
In Las Vegas.
in Las Vegas.
New Mexico.
Alan has done a great job of restoring that. And one of the complaints I've heard about Franciscan and parts of the Alvarado was that they didn't have, they weren't restaurants, there were toilets in the rest, maybe every group. I think some of the hotel rooms, if the Alvarado had restaurants, but when Alan Apple went in and refurbished that, he had to completely gut the second floor because they wanted to put bathrooms in every room. Sorry, I have a comment.
That when he purchased that, I think it took a long time to get enough money to start storing. And they were expensive, brand of women. And I remember I was looking for that. I was with Fred. We managed to get in and look through all the windows at the main floor and the dining room.
It's a wonderful restoration if you get a chance to get to Las Vegas and spend some time with it. Even the movie you've been waving your hand for about half an hour. I think you learned.
Something to say, also this, the father is in my father did a 4-foot by 4-foot sculpture that was in the Spotlight Lounge for the remodel of the Alvarado in the 50s. And it was made of steel and cast aluminum. So at least from a material standpoint, there's a chance it could still be somewhere besides the landfill. But if anyone ever sees or hears about a sculpture, I have no idea if it was part of the auction, we had moved away, but keep an eye out for that.
That was the sculpture that was kind of part of the 1950s remodel, right? The question was, if anybody knows what happened to it, let us know.
Chuck has, thank you, Chuck has a photo of it that can be posted somewhere. And we can say, you just see that action.
That was the photo.
It is in that, Tom, oh, he does have, a picture of it.
You know, Alvarado's stuff shows up all over the place. I know one who lives up near Wyoming and Comanche. And the house next door to hers, all of the roof tiles are old Alvarado roof tiles. So I think if you start gathering this stuff around town, and then I think Joe, you've had found some of the Indian
Yeah.
benches.
Well, we've got here in the museum collection, actually, one of, Elizabeth, Coulter, the Mary Elizabeth Jane Coulter, I'll get it back here. The showcase, in the display that we have here. So. Get up.
Well, he never did do it. He still tried to.
Well, I hope you never do. And thank you very much, both of you. Another reminder, he said shamelessly, next month's meeting will be on the third Sunday of the month, the 20th, and it will be retired UNM Professor Richard Belzer on Don Perkins, and will be in the auditorium down the corridor to the left as you come in. And I hope we'll see you all then. Thank you very much.